InvestSMART separately managed account benefit number 3. Total transparency. In a separately managed account, you'll see all holdings, transactions and income. Unlike a managed fund where you'll only be shown the top 10 holdings or sometimes even less. You get to see the successes and we won't hide the losers. With a simple click on the stock code, you can read the logic behind every buy and sell decision. For more information, visit www.investsmart.com.au or download our new app.
Hello, I'm Tony Kaye, I'm the editor of REA Report. Welcome to Property Point. I'm joined by Nerida Conisbee, Chief Economist of REA Group.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Nerida, for coming in. Nerida, I wanted to talk about the in-demand suburbs around Australia. What are you seeing at the moment?
So we track demand based on the number of people looking to buy and compare it to listings. So if an area doesn't have many listings but lots and lots of people wanting to get into the market, we classify that as high demand. So we can track it because we've got 6.3 million people on our site every month. So it does give us a clear indication. At the moment, when we have a look at the most in-demand suburbs, they are very much Melbourne and Sydney based. Well, not so much Sydney, New South Wales. So in New South Wales, Farnborough Heights came up as number 1, so that's a suburb in Wollongong. And, I think for Sydney people being priced out of the market, Wollongong and Central Coast continue to provide a great alternative. It's quite a long commute, but the cost of housing is a lot cheaper. So there was 3 Wollongong suburbs that featured in the national top 10. We're also continuing to see northern beaches feature, so not so much places like Manly. So Manly's hit $3 million median price now, but places like Allambie Heights, which are a little bit more inland and a little bit more affordable, but still provide that lifestyle that people are looking for. In Melbourne, it's interesting because we're sort of moving northeast. So places like Briar Hill, Warrandyte, even going out to the Dandenongs continue to feature very strongly. So again, coming back to what people are looking for in housing, they still want a big home on a big block, but they don't want to pay a lot. And those areas do provide some affordable options.
Yeah, it's definitely more affordable. And we were talking off camera about the transport corridors in. They definitely are becoming more congested.
They are, absolutely. And I think it then comes down to great public transport that, places that are on very good train lines, particularly in Melbourne, do seem to be featuring really strongly.
Yeah. So those particular suburbs, are they more owner-occupiers rather than investors?
It would suggest so. I mean, a lot of it is, housing as opposed to apartments. We do see a lot of investors focus on apartments. But certainly, we can't split it out, but it does seem to be owner-occupiers that are likely targeting those areas.
Yeah. It's still obviously pretty costly to get in to the Melbourne and Sydney markets in particular. Should investors be looking further afield?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, places like Perth, I don't think Perth is at the bottom of the market. And I think if you were looking to invest in Perth, you'd want to hold for at least 2 to 3 years. So I think it's still a while to go till we hit bottom, but certainly some suburbs in Perth are doing very well. So particularly those inner west suburbs, Peppermint Grove continues to see strong growth, strong demand. And also the northern beaches suburbs, so City Beach and Trigg are seeing very, very high demand. So, some early signs that things may be improving, but, I think when the market does turn, it's not going to turn and rapidly increase in prices. It'll be a slow increase, and we're not there yet. But I think in the next couple of years we probably will hit the bottom.
What about markets in Queensland? What's happening up there?
It's interesting in Queensland because we have had a very strong market in Gold Coast, and when we looked at the top 10 suburbs, only 1 suburb in the Gold Coast featured, which was quite surprising. The rest were in Brisbane. So very much inner Brisbane, we're seeing high demand, and not so much for apartments, but more houses. But also the northwest. So there's a corridor running out the northwest where there's bigger blocks, acreages, and those sorts of things, which it hasn't come up before. I mean, typically we see Gold Coast and we see inner Brisbane, but this really strong northwest demand is really showing up at the moment.
And what about further up the Queensland coast? Is there much demand in those areas?
It's not coming up on site, and I think there's probably pockets that are doing better. I mean, mining towns are still really tough at the moment. We look at prices as to what's happening there. They're still the poorest performing in Australia. So again, like Perth, it's taking a while for that market to turn.
What interests me is that out in some of the regional areas, the the cost differential between, buying into a big city versus buying in a regional area and getting, a large acreage, often a nice home, for a fraction of the cost. It's quite amazing.
It is amazing. I've been doing some roadshows with REA New South Wales, and one trip we did Albury, and then we did Wagga, and Albury's seen very strong price growth over the past 12 months. So again, I think it's Sydney money probably coming into that market. A very different situation in Wagga. So Wagga, the prices are remaining stable. The median's at 300,000. But again, I don't think we're seeing so much Sydney money targeting it. But Albury, it's doing really well at the moment.
Now, we often tend to not talk too much about what's happening in Canberra, Darwin, Adelaide, Hobart. So what about in those markets?
Yeah, so Canberra was interesting. When we looked at the top 10 suburbs most in demand in Canberra, they were all north side. But it was interesting that they cut across all price points. So there was cheaper suburbs, sort of 90s subdivisions, and there were the more expensive sort of inner 60s subdivisions. So it seems in Canberra, if you're looking to buy, you want to be north side. Very similar situation in Darwin. So in Darwin, there was only one suburb not in this one north side pocket of Darwin. So it does seem to be that these areas that everyone's targeting tend to be quite close to each other.
Yeah.
Hobart, we've seen very strong demand in inner Hobart. Hobart itself and those surrounding suburbs continue to see strong demand. Hobart in general continues to see very, very strong demand, not just from buyers and rent, but also renters as well. There just seems to be a lot of people targeting that market at the moment.
It's still quite affordable down there, isn't it?
It's so affordable. Sandy Bay has a median, the most expensive suburb in Hobart, has a median of 770,000. So, I think when people go on our site and they can see what they can buy in Hobart for $1 million, you can get such an amazing property compared to what you could buy in Sydney.
And Adelaide, I suppose, the big demand areas would be, the beachside suburbs.
It's actually inner south.
Right.
That's coming up. Yeah, and surprisingly, it's not the beach. Sometimes the beaches come up, places like Glenelg come up, but places like Norwood and Unley seem to be the really, really strong areas at the moment. So again, I think it's quite similar to Perth, that in Adelaide we see a really strong flight to those really quality suburbs that, people really aspire to live in.
Oh, well, it's great to have you in the studio again, Nerida.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. I'm Tony Kaye, the editor of Eureka Report.